1970s gave us some of the most brutal drag machines ever built. Cars that ruled the quarter mile with raw muscle. These are the 12 fastest legends that burned rubber and made history. Number 12, 1970, Plymouth Hemi Cuda. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda is pure thunder on wheels. Built on the same E-body as the Dodge Challenger, it looked wider, meaner, and ready to throw down at any track. No more economy pony stuff, this was a full muscle car with a mission, and that mission was speed. When you talk about engines that made people's jaws drop, the 426 cubic inch Hemi VF8 sits right at the top. It pumped out 425 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. Yes, those numbers sound cartoonish, but they were very real, and they gave the Cuda the kind of launch that could pin you back in your seat before you could even say, hold on. The quarter mile, only 14 seconds flat, and that was in showroom trim. Imagine what it felt like with drag slicks and a good tune. Now, if you think every Barracuda came with that monster engine, here's the twist. Out of more than 65,000 Barracudas built in 1970 and 1971, only 780 got the Hemi. That is barely 1%. Suddenly, you realize why the Hemi Cuda gets whispered about at car shows like it is a racing myth come alive. And if rarity was not enough, the 4-speed manual gearbox made it even more exclusive, with fewer than 300 hardtops built that way. But the Hemi Cuda was not just about numbers. It had looks that screamed performance. Picture that split grille up front with round headlamps glaring back at you, shaker hood poking through, and bold rear fenders stretching wide. The FE5 red paint option with a black vinyl top made it look almost like a comic book car come to life. Bright, loud, and proud. People knew instantly it was not built for quiet Sunday drives. Of course, you did not spend much time staring at it when it went by, because the sound of that Hemi was like thunder echoing through the streets, a low rumble that turned into a scream at full throttle. And before you knew it, the car was gone, taillights shrinking into the distance. 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.8 seconds might not shock modern drivers, but in the early 70s, that was mind-bending acceleration. The inside kept things simple because who needed luxury when your car was basically a rolling drag strip ticket? A plain dash, a 3-spoke wheel, and bucket seats that held you just tight enough. All the comfort you needed came from knowing you had one of the fastest production cars America ever let loose. And here's the best part. The Hemi stayed around for only 2 model years. By 1972, compression ratios dropped, and the big motors were gone. That short run made every Hemi Cuda feel like a rare treasure, one you might only glimpse once in your lifetime. So when people say muscle legend, this is exactly the car they mean. Number 11, 1970 Dodge Challenger RT426 Hemi. And now let's shift the spotlight from the Hemi Cuda to its brother in arms, the 1970 Dodge Challenger RT with the mighty 426 Hemi. This car did not just arrive to compete, it came dressed in plum crazy purple or Hemi orange, waving stripes and vinyl roofs like a racing flag in the wind. One look at it and you knew it was not built to sit still. The numbers alone tell you it was a serious machine. The 426 cubic inch Hemi VF8 was rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. That meant this car could launch to 60 miles per hour in just 4.7 seconds, and it would blaze through the quarter mile in 13.3 seconds. Back in 1970, that was the kind of speed that made stoplights feel like starting lines. Before you think it was all engine, the Challenger RT came with the A33 Track Pack, or the Super Track Pack, which added a Dana 60 rear axle, limited slip differential, heavy-duty suspension, and disc brakes up front. In simple words, the car could not only go fast in a straight line, but also handle the turns and stop when it needed to. You got a complete muscle car package, not just a one-trick pony. Shifting gears here, the 4-speed manual with its pistol grip shifter made the experience even wilder. Every time you grabbed that handle, it felt like you were signing a contract with speed itself. And because fewer than 140 Challengers were paired with that gearbox, it was a rare thrill reserved for drivers who wanted full control of the Hemi's fury. The Challenger's looks kept the excitement rolling. A shaker hood poked up to announce the power beneath. Rally wheels wrapped in Goodyear tires gripped the pavement, and bold stripes traced the body like lightning bolts down the sides. Even the fuel door looked special with its flip-up design and locking cap, as if the gas tank itself needed to be secured from curious bystanders. Let's not forget the cabin, because Dodge gave this car a space that was both business and fun. Black vinyl bucket seats held you snug, wood grain trim stretched across the dash and doors, and rally gauges stared back with a tachometer ready to climb past 6,000 revolutions per minute. It was less about luxury and more about making the driver feel part of the machine, one lever pull and pedal press at a time. The Challenger was not some short-lived experiment either. In 1970, Dodge threw this car right into the heat of the pony car battles, standing tall against Mustang, Camaro, and Firebird. Yet, with the Hemi option, it carried an aura that said, "I am not here to play." The way it mixed style, raw speed, and factory-backed racing equipment made it unforgettable. Number 10, 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. Moving from the Challenger, let's bring in the car that made tire makers cry for mercy. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. This was the kind of car that turned every quiet road into a burnout competition, whether you wanted it to or not. The big story starts under the hood, where the 454 cubic inch V8 engine weighted with 450 horsepower at 5,600 revolutions per minute and 500 pound-feet of torque at 3,600. Numbers like that meant the Chevelle could hit 60 miles per hour in 6 seconds flat, and the quarter mile would disappear in just 13.8 seconds. With the right gears, magazine tests even clocked it faster, dipping into the low 13-second range at over 108 miles per hour. That was the muscle car equivalent of bringing a hammer to a pillow fight. Yet, this car was more than straight-line madness. Chevrolet tuned the chassis with tricks learned from the Camaro Z28 program, giving this heavy hitter the ability to dart through turns with surprising agility. Reviewers back in the day said it felt like a much smaller car when it had to hustle, which made the Chevelle stand out in a field of big block brutes. Before the speed even started, you could spot this SS from far away. The cowl induction hood, with its little trapdoor, opened up when the engine demanded more air, almost like the car itself taking a deep breath before sprinting. Styled steel wheels wrapped in wide oval tires and a blacked-out grille completed the look, giving the Chevelle a face that meant business. It did not need fancy lines to say what it was. It let the rumble and smoke explain everything. Step past the bold body, and you found a cabin built for driving first and comfort second. Bucket seats in vinyl, a center console for the shifter, and a simple dash with gauges were the main players. No plush extras, just the tools you needed to hang on when the LS6 let loose. Some drivers even swapped in Hurst shifters because the factory setup had a habit of jamming when you pushed the 454 too hard. It was muscle car charm at its finest, raw power making even the gear lever nervous. The balance of weight to power told its own story. At about 3,800 pounds paired with 450 horsepower, the Chevelle SS had a ratio of just over 8 pounds per pony. That math explained why it sprinted so hard, leaving plenty of supposedly faster cars wondering how they just got passed by a family coupe. Chevrolet only built 4,475 LS6 engines that year, and they all went into Chevelle. That meant coupes, convertibles, and even El Caminos got a taste of the madness. But no matter the body, the spirit was the same. Brute force, mixed with just enough handling to make it a proper contender. Number 9, 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Now that the Chevelle has left rubber on the pavement, the spotlight shifts to the 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429, a car that sounds like thunder every time you touch the throttle. This was not just another pony car option, it was a machine Ford built, so it could sneak a racing engine into showrooms and make sure NASCAR rules were satisfied. The company stuffed a massive 429 cubic inch V8 under the hood, and suddenly the Mustang looked like it had been hitting the gym all winter. Instead of starting with numbers, let's talk about the look that made people stop and stare. The hood scoop sat like a black crown right in the middle. The chin spoiler hugged the ground, and Boss 429 lettering on the sides announced exactly what kind of trouble you were about to get into. Even the headlights changed from the year before. Now with twin dual-beam units that gave the car a sharper glare. It had no fake scoops hanging off the back fenders anymore, just a clean, aggressive profile. Of course, this Mustang was not a soft cruiser. It came with Ford's competition suspension, hydraulic shocks, heavy-duty springs, and sway bars at both ends. That meant it could actually take corners with confidence, instead of wobbling like some of its rivals. Combine that with Goodyear polyglass tires wrapped around 15 by 7-inch Magnum 500 wheels, and the car felt planted, even when the speed climbed. Now, let's finally dive into that legendary engine. Official ratings said 375 horsepower at 5,200 revolutions per minute, but every expert will tell you the real number was closer to 500. The torque was massive, enough to shove the car forward with just a tap of the pedal, paired with a Holley 735 cubic feet per minute carburetor and a solid lifter camshaft. This motor did not complain, it begged to be pushed harder. All that power had to go somewhere. So Ford bolted on a 4-speed top-loader manual transmission, linked to a 9-inch traction lock differential with 31 spline axles. The gear ratios, often 3.91 to 1, kept the car launching hard. From 0 to 60 miles per hour, it took just over 5 seconds, and the quarter mile flashed by in 13.5 seconds. For the early 1970s, that was the kind of time that embarrassed a lot of so-called muscle kings. And if you thought the cabin was just plain, Ford actually gave it some flair. Comfort weave vinyl bucket seats came standard, wood grain trim lined the dash, and a rim-blow steering wheel sat ready to buzz your hands if you hit the horn. Even the instrument cluster looked serious, with an 8,000 revolutions per minute tachometer, waiting for that engine to scream. No fold-down rear seat though. Ford wanted strength, not extra cargo space. What makes this Boss 429 so fascinating is how smooth it feels on the street. Many expected it to be temperamental, but instead, it had the manners of a daily driver and the punch of a drag racer. Number 8, 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. Now, it is time to talk about a car that sounds like it should be wearing a black robe in court. The 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. This car was not built to whisper down the road. It was built to shout at every stoplight, "I am faster than you." The numbers speak loudly with a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 4.9 seconds. For the time, that was lightning, and even today, it earns respect. Instead of chasing the largest possible motor, Pontiac tried something clever. They used a 400 cubic inch engine, which is about 402 cubic inch, and gave it special breathing parts. Round ports, a hot cam with over 300 degrees of timing, and a lift just past half an inch made sure this engine could suck in air like a hungry vacuum cleaner. That motor was rated at 370 horsepower and 445 pound-feet of torque, which meant when you pressed the gas, the car leapt forward as if it had just remembered it left the oven on. Moving from the motor to the gears, you will find this Judge came only with short and mean ratios like 3.90 or 4.33. That meant highway cruising was not exactly peaceful. But if your goal was to leave tire marks as souvenirs, this setup was perfect. Add in a 4-speed manual with a Hurst shifter, and suddenly you are not just driving, you're playing a game of shift or be left behind. Switching lanes into looks, the car carried a starlight black finish that made it look ready for a midnight drag race. Quad headlights and the famous Endura bumper gave the front a bold face, while the rear wing added just enough flair to say, "Yes, I take racing seriously." A hood tachometer sat proudly up top, letting you read revs without taking eyes off the road, which was especially useful if your right foot was eager. Inside, things stayed tough but stylish, with black vinyl bucket seats, faux wood trim, and that Hurst shifter waiting like a joystick for battle. The steering wheel framed a 140 miles per hour speedometer, daring you to test the limits. Even the gauges whispered promises of speed, and once the engine lit up, those whispers became shouts. Back to Performance magazine tests decades later showed this Judge could run a traction-limited 13.6 seconds in the quarter mile at just over 105 miles per hour. With proper tires, it was believed to dip into the 12-second zone, which for a full-bodied car of its era was outrageous. This was not a car you bought to drive gently. This was a car you bought to make an entrance and exit quicker than anyone else. Number 7, 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. The next star waiting in the lane is the 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1, a car that came dressed like it was ready for a boxing match. Painted only in Saturn yellow or Apollo white, with bold black stripes lined in red, this Buick did not just want to be seen, it wanted to be remembered. One glance told you it was not playing nice, and the spoiler plus splitter only made the point louder. Instead of beginning with the looks, let us dive under the hood, because this is where the Buick truly flexed. The engine was a 455 cubic inch V8, which equals about 455 cubic inch. The Stage 1 package gave it stronger parts, bigger valves, and hotter timing, and the result was 360 horsepower with a mountain of torque, measuring 510 pound-feet. That torque was so high, drivers joked it could yank tree stumps out of the ground without even trying. From there, the story only gets better once you check the stopwatch. This GSX could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.5 seconds, shoot through the quarter mile in 13.38 seconds, and reach a top speed of 135 miles per hour. Those numbers meant if you lined up at the drag strip, the other guy would be chewing on your tire smoke before the announcer finished calling your name. Switching gears to the way it drove, Buick did not settle for just straight-line bragging rights. Quick ratio steering, sway bars, disc brakes up front, and a 4-link rear suspension gave it real balance. This was not a clumsy big car just going fast in one direction. It handled like it had something to prove, and it did so with a grin. Add in a 4-speed manual transmission, and suddenly driving it felt like swinging a baseball bat that always made contact. Speaking of visuals, that fiberglass hood with its giant stripes and hood-mounted tack made it stand out even when parked. People knew right away this was not Grandma's Skylark. Even the small details like rally wheels and bright trim made sure the GSX looked serious without ever being boring. Now here's the part that puzzled everyone. Buick rated the Stage 1 at 360 horsepower. But how could a car that quick only make that number? Experts quickly agreed the real figure was closer to 400 horsepower, maybe even more. That secret only added to its legend because the GSX never had to brag. Its performance did all the talking. Number 6, 1971 Dodge Charger RT446 Pack. Now shifting lanes from the last car, let us pull up something bold and bright, the 1971 Dodge Charger RT with the mighty 440 six-pack. This car looked like it was ready to win a drag race the moment you saw it in that strong factory color called Citron Yellow, with black stripes across the hood and sides. Add the front and rear spoilers, plus those sharp rally wheels, and suddenly it felt more like a street fighter than just a muscle car. The talk about this car always begins with the heart, and that heart is a 440 cubic inch V8 topped with 3 two-barrel carburetors. Dodge gave it a track pack setup, so you had a heavy-duty Dana 60 rear axle and a 4-speed manual that came with the pistol grip shifter everyone loves to grab. The combo made shifting gears a wild thrill, because every push felt like it added more thunder to the road. Next up, the numbers, because that is where this Charger proves its worth. From 0 to 60 miles per hour, it could make the sprint in 5.5 seconds. Take it down the quarter mile, and the stopwatch would show 14.1 seconds before the finish line. Those are not shy numbers. They are loud, bold, and fast enough to make you laugh at anyone doubting this car's muscle. But let us not only stare at the engine and timing slips, because the driving feel had its own story. Power steering made it lighter in the hands. Power disc brakes at the front gave it confidence, and the rear sway bar helped this big Mopar stick better in the turns. So even though it was wide and strong, the car handled with more control than you might expect, giving drivers both power and confidence in the same seat. Now swing back to the cabin, where Dodge knew how to add fun. You had bucket seats, a console, that famous Hurst pistol grip sticking out like it was ready for action, and a rally dash with the tachometer right there to remind you how high the revs were climbing. Add in the 3-spoke tough wheel, and suddenly even cruising around town felt like preparing for a race. Even the details outside made this car memorable. Dual body color mirrors, chrome exhaust tips peeking out under the rear, hood pins that shouted "Race Day," and the wide stripes gave the Charger a look that made other drivers take a second glance. People might tell you sales were lower that year, But the Charger RT with the six-pack was never about numbers in a showroom. It was about numbers on a stopwatch. And with times like these, it made sure its legend never faded. Number 5, 1971, AMC Javelin AMX 401. And rolling right after that Charger, we get a curveball from the underdog corner, the 1971 AMC Javelin AMX. Painted in bold colors and shaped like it had something to prove, it was AMC's way of saying they could play in the same fast lane. The part that always grabs attention is what lives under the hood, a 401 cubic inch V8, sat there with a Motorcraft 4-barrel carburetor and dual intake tubes feeding it air. It was rated at 330 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque, which meant pressing the gas pedal turned into a lesson in physics very quickly. The torque shoved you back in your seat like you just sat down too hard on a playground swing. Now, before we get to the fun numbers, let us pause at the way this car looked and handled. The Go package gave it a cowl induction hood, spoilers front and rear, rally pack gauges with a 140 miles per hour speedometer, plus stiffer suspension. That meant it did not just go quick in a straight line, it also held its ground when corners came up. Power steering kept the arms from getting tired, and disc brakes up front meant slowing down did not feel like stopping a train with your shoes. All right, now for the stopwatch moments, because this is where the AMX proves its point. From 0 to 60 miles per hour, it managed the run in 5.8 seconds. Take it down the quarter mile, and the time slips read 14.4 seconds. Those numbers put it shoulder to shoulder with the big players, and honestly, that was AMC punching way above what anyone expected. Now let's about interior. The car carried a mix of fun and function. Black leather seats, an engine-turned dash, and that floor console with its shifter all worked together to make the driver feel like a racer, not just a commuter. The rally pack gauges added more drama, showing revs climbing while the speedometer needle chased numbers higher and higher. Even the tri-color AMX badges reminded you this was not your average pony car. What tied it all together was the sound. With a side exit exhaust and that big block singing, it had a voice that let the whole street know it was in motion. No mufflers here, just raw music echoing back off the walls. Number 4, 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W30. After the punchy little surprise from AMC, it is time to swing back to one of the heavy hitters, the 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W30. This car was proof that even when rules started cutting power, you could still build something that felt like a street fighter with manners. Let's start with that number everyone remembers, 442. A lot of people think it means an engine size, but it does not. It stood for a 4-barrel carburetor, a 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust. Over the years, the meaning shifted a little, but the name stuck. And by the early 70s, it was one of the coolest badges you could spot on a muscle car. Of course, what really mattered was what sat under the hood. Oldsmobile gave it a 455 cubic inch V8 that, even with lower compression for emissions, still packed serious punch. Rated at 350 horsepower in gross figures and 300 in net numbers, it could still put down a mountain of torque, 500 pound-feet, when tuned with the W30 package. That meant even when horsepower numbers looked smaller, the shove you felt in the seat was still more than enough to make you grin. Now, let's talk about how quick it really was. This W30 could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.5 seconds. That is quicker than you would expect for a big body car running regular fuel. Down the quarter mile, it clocked 14.8 seconds at 98 miles per hour. Sure, compared to the wild 60s, that might sound like a diet version, but in real life, it was still more speed than most drivers knew what to do with. Before you think it was all about the engine, the W30 package also added some smart upgrades. An aluminum intake manifold, special cylinder heads, and a fiberglass hood with working air scoops made sure the motor could breathe and stay cool. Add in a hotter camshaft for the manual cars, plus low restriction exhaust, and suddenly you had a setup that felt sharper and nastier than the base version. Inside, things looked just as ready. The car carried a 4-spoke steering wheel, comfy bucket seats, and a clean dashboard that let the driver focus on business. The sound of dual exhaust rumbling under your feet was the kind of soundtrack you could never get tired of, especially when the tack needle climbed higher. Number 3, 1975 Chevrolet Monza 350. Moving forward to something completely different, the 1975 Chevrolet Monza 350. This car was not built to smash every drag strip record, but it became a curious part of racing history because of its size, shape, and the fact that you could get it with a small block V8. The Monza looked sharp with its long hood and short rear deck, almost like someone shrunk a European sports coupe and gave it American attitude. The 2+2 hatchback body was the one everyone remembers, with quad headlights and a nose that made it stand out among other compact cars of the mid-70s. It was smaller than most cars from that time, and that made it light on its feet. Power started with little four-cylinder engines, but the fun part was that Chevrolet squeezed in a V8. In California, you could even order the 350 cubic inch small block, making it the most serious version of the Monza. It did not breathe fire like the big muscle cars from a few years earlier, but compared to its class rivals, having a proper V8 under the hood gave it bragging rights. Performance numbers told the story in plain math. The Monza 350 could reach 60 miles per hour in about 10 to 12 seconds. That was not lightning quick, but it was enough to make daily driving fun. And remember, we are talking mid-70s fuel crisis years. The quarter-mile time landed around 17 to 19 seconds, crossing the line at just over 100 miles per hour. For what it was meant to be, those figures were respectable. Even more interesting, the Monza's lightweight and small size made it popular with racers who wanted a cheap, nimble platform. Its suspension was tuned well for its time, so it could handle corners better than bigger cars. And the V8 gave it a little thunder down the straight. Many racers later used the Monza's shape and parts for custom builds, proving it had more potential than the numbers suggested. Inside the Monza, drivers got a simple dashboard and comfortable seats. Nothing flashy, but it fit the era perfectly. Some versions even had bright, bold colors on the outside that screamed 70s style. It was not luxury, but it was practical and sporty enough to feel like you were driving something special compared to an ordinary compact. The story gets even more fun when you realize Chevrolet once planned to give the Monza a rotary engine. That never happened, but the idea alone shows how much experimenting went into this little car. It may not have been the fastest track star, but the Monza 350 carved out its own strange and memorable place in the lineup of fast cars from that time. Number 2, 1977 Pontiac Can-Am 400. Now that we had a taste of small and nimble, let's throw in something bold from 1977. The Pontiac Can-Am. The Can-Am looked sharp in cameo white with bright stripes and a spoiler out back. Pontiac sent these cars off to get dressed up with graphics and that shaker hood scoop. It was not just for looks though, because under the hood sat a V8 engine ready to go. That scoop even told you what was hiding below, either a 400 cubic inch engine or a 403 cubic inch engine. Talking numbers makes it even better. With the Pontiac 400 cubic inch engine, the Can-Am hit 60 miles per hour in about 10 seconds flat. Keep your foot down, and it would clear the quarter mile in around 17 seconds, crossing at 84 miles per hour. Not record-breaking, but for the late 70s, this was strong muscle. It pushed 180 horsepower at 3,600 revolutions per minute, and torque was a meaty 325 pound-feet at only 1,600 revolutions per minute. That low-end pull made it fun when the light turned green. Even the California version with the 403 carried nearly the same punch, just with slightly different torque numbers. Power traveled through the tried-and-true turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic transmission with 3 forward gears that were as durable as they came. Add in a 2.41 rear gear, and you had a car that could cruise highways all day, yet still kick down when you wanted speed. To keep things steady, Pontiac gave it their radial-tuned suspension with front and rear stabilizer bars. The ride was firm but never harsh, which made it enjoyable for long drives. Stopping power came from front disc brakes paired with rear drums, simple but effective for a car of this size. Slide into the cabin and you got a sporty Grand Prix dash, rally gauges, bucket seats, and even a custom steering wheel option. The look was bold, the ride was solid, and the Can-Am proved that muscle was not gone yet in 1977. Number 1, 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra. From one bold pony to another, now the spotlight jumps to 1978 and a Mustang wearing the name King Cobra. It had wild stripes, a snake on the hood, and a look that made kids point and laugh in awe. Underneath all that flash sat a 302 cubic inch V8. It was not breaking records for power numbers, but the way it carried itself with rack and pinion steering and a suspension tuned tighter than its Mustang II brothers gave it a lively feel. Add in heavy-duty springs, stabilizer bars, and those wide radial tires, and suddenly this small car acted like it wanted to play on the big track. The punchline comes when you look at speed. This Mustang could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.3 seconds. Push it further and the quarter mile was gone in 15 seconds even. Let the car stretch its legs, and top speed climbed all the way to 150 miles per hour. For a late 70s machine, those numbers were shocking, especially when other pony cars had already vanished from the showrooms. The real fun came from its style. Fender flares stuck out like shoulders, the chin spoiler kept things serious, and the King Cobra graphics shouted louder than any radio station. Even if the horsepower was modest for the time, the mix of bold looks, solid handling, and surprising speed made it unforgettable. That's a wrap-up for today's video. If you enjoyed this list, hit like, share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more.